Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on the recent content we've been putting out on one of our older TikToks. Fredo 2 times commented, "Gotta stop hating, man. He's got crazy stats as well as Luca, and his team is winning more." That was in retrospect to Joel Embiid and his MVP campaign. Good comment for sure, and I think he is having a historic season. And will I stop hating? Probably not. But regardless, if you want your comment to be read like this one, just leave one anywhere on Instagram, TikTok, or on our channel. And before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more short form content and updates.
So we'll just kind of get right into it. Kind of an interesting week in the NBA this week. I mean, we had injuries. We had guys getting booed. We had coaches going on epic rants. I mean, we had basically
Forgot about that.
everything. Rolling around in the NBA. And now also, we're starting to get things like trade rumors. Going since we have less than a month before the trade deadline, which is always a fun time. Just remember we will on the day of the trade deadline, we will live stream it, and react to, whatever trades happen. And, if there were trades that had already happened before, we'll
Yeah.
discuss those as well. And then obviously, if whatever the next episode after that is, we'll cover those in more detail. But, we'll start off with some bad injuries. So first off, John Morant, right? Had shoulder surgery and his season has already come to an end, right? Which really stinks. I mean, he only got to play in 9 games. In those 9 games, averaged 25, 6 and 8, 47 from the field, only 27.5 from three. But still, it's a very small sample size. And it sucks, right? Because obviously we know what happened, right, with his situation, his personal stuff in the off season. Um, and then obviously he was suspended for 25 games, and then that in combination with the injuries to other guys really put him in a hole. And eventually he did come back, right, and played really well, right, in the games he played in, right. Obviously in his first game back, he had that crazy game winner. They won the first 4 games he came back and played in. Then he missed one, and then they lost, their next 3. Then he came back, won one, then lost one, and then the last game against the Lakers, they ended up winning. So I mean, all in all, right, in the games that he played, right, they were basically, I guess, 6-3, right, which is that's really good, right? I mean, you talk about the percentage. I mean, that's basically more than 60% of your games. That doesn't mean they would win all of those, averaged out over, however many games it would be. I guess 50 something. But either way, we already knew he was going to make an impact. But now he's gone, right? So that pretty much puts a wrap on the Grizzlies season
Mm-hmm.
before it even really started, right? Because it kind of felt like they were starting to hit some momentum. They had actually won 3 in a row, and a couple of those were after Ja was out. But now Marcus Smart, right? He also got hurt against the Mavs in a weird play where he took a jump shot and jammed his finger after shooting it, and that's going to put him out for 6 weeks, right? So obviously, I think with the Grizzlies, they know this is pretty much toast, which is unfortunate, right? They were in the playoffs last year. They were one of the top teams the last couple of seasons. Um, and it's a setback, but I guess if you want to look at one silver lining, it is a setback, but they do have their first round pick. So, at the very least, they'll be in the lottery. And then, since they already have a pretty bad record, they are, I believe, 14-23 as of this recording,
Yeah.
right? So, there's only a handful of teams that are worse than them, right? I believe in the West, it's just 2 teams. And then in the East, it's 2 teams as well. So they're like the fifth worst team. And that may change. Over time. But regardless, they're going to be like, probably one of the 5, 6 worst teams in the NBA. So they should have, in theory, like a top 5 pick. And then they can either use that, and take a player that they think is a really good fit, or they can use it and dangle it around in a trade. And then you go into next season, you got Ja, you'd have Desmond Bain and Jaren Jackson, who, assuming they play the rest of the way, maybe if they pick up some injuries here and there, Memphis may not necessarily push them to play. But if they do play, they will, I guess, be a little bit more comfortable having more offensive responsibility. Then next year, maybe Adams comes back, or maybe you trade him. Clark comes back. Maybe you see what you can do in the deadline. Maybe you can move a couple of guys that you don't necessarily feel like you need anymore, and then you just kind of go from there. So it does suck, but at the very least, again, at least you're like, at a point where like your record is pretty bad. So you're at least a lock to get a pretty solid pick. And then from there you can go on. But it really is a bummer because, again, he's one of the most exciting players in the NBA. And it did feel like he was turning a corner, in terms of staying out of trouble, being a good leader for the Grizzlies and leading them to wins. Because again, they went 6-3 in the games he played. And now that's been taken away incredibly quickly. So it sucks. But I mean, talk to me about and what do you think this means for the Grizzlies? Do you think it's a similar setup, or do you look at it differently?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you wholeheartedly. I think he had only been back for a little bit under a month. I think next week would have been a full month because I think he came back December 19th. So really cut short like very quickly. But it was going to be an uphill battle regardless. I think we all knew that. I think there was a glimpse of hope that they could make the play-in. And I think they have that core that they have. It's elite. It's young. We're big fans of Memphis, but I just think they were in such a deep hole. It was too deep for them to climb out of that to really, make a huge playoff push. Regardless, though, it sucks. Like you said, he's a talented player, young, supposed to be face of the league. That's what a lot of people have said. But hey, it is what it is. Part of the whole was due to him. A lot of it is due to the injuries for sure. Steven Adams, Brandon Clark, and now even Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart is only going to be out 6 weeks, but still, that's a lot of time, and I just don't think that's going to contribute to helping win games.
And he already missed time before.
Exactly. So, the injuries have been the name of the game for this team, and that's unfortunate. But like you said, the silver lining really is that lottery pick, and I think it would be interesting because I think they're going to be like a bottom 16 probably. I think that's the trajectory they're on right now. So, you can't feel too horrible about it, and especially, if you add a lottery pick to this, like, I would arguably say, elite young roster. I think, you have some things to look forward to because Ja will be back next season, hopefully. Steven Adams, Triple J, we already know, Desmond Bane. So, I think there's a lot going for Memphis in the future, but, this season is most likely going to be a wash. And that's okay because I think you have the time and you have the resources available. I am curious to see what they do during the deadline because I think, they do have the flexibility to somewhat free up some roster space, maybe like a Luke Kennard, maybe somebody like that. That would be interesting because I don't think they're probably going to want to pay him going into like, the luxury tax next season because I think it'll be Desmond Bane who will put them in the luxury tax, oddly enough, with his extension kicking in. But yeah, I think it would be interesting if they look to move maybe a guy like Tillman or what's the other guy's name? Conchar, I think is his name. So maybe they get some like second round draft picks, something like that. The question would be like, do they really want to bring in another guy, that would take up some more salary? I think they would probably just be looking for picks at that point. So I'm not sure like what they're going to do during the deadline, but I would like to see them free up some roster spots and get some second round picks back maybe in the offseason or something like that. But I think, you don't want to shake up the core at all because I think the core is fine when they're fully healthy.
Yeah, right. And they did, make a move today where they waived, I guess, I can't remember if it was today or
It
yesterday.
was yesterday.
Yesterday, my bad. Yeah, they waived Bismack Biyombo.
Yeah.
And then used that roster spot to sign one of those young guys, Vince Williams Jr., right, I
Yeah.
believe out of VCU,
Mm-hmm.
who had been starting and playing pretty well for them. So, now that's another young guy that you're going to lock up on a long-term,
Yep.
smaller contract, right? And, kind of like the Miles McBride thing, right? Where, like, if it works, you got a good young player on a cheap contract. And then if it doesn't, it's a very tradable contract
Right.
because it's small. So, yeah, so I think, like you said, they'll probably look to do that.
Yeah.
And, anybody that they feel is, not really doesn't really need to be a part of the core or, long term, those are the guys they may look to move. And there may be a couple of teams that will call on some of those guys because I think some of those guys could help a team outside of the Grizzlies this season.
Agreed.
We do have some guys on that team that are solid.
Yeah.
And then moving on, another injury, Tyrese Halliburton, right? He got hurt against the Celtics, right? He slipped and fell, looked pretty bad. Luckily for him, they did say it was a grade 1 hamstring strain, so he's going to be out, or at least reevaluated in a couple weeks. So that could mean, he's out for like, 3+. Who knows? Indiana did end up winning the game, right? Obviously, I think it was, basically like on a couple of controversial calls, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had the Jaylen Brown foul that was overturned, right? Or he got fouled on a shot and they overturned it. That took away a couple of free throws, and then Benedict Mathurin, right, took a contested three that was contested by Porzingis. They
Yeah.
fouled him, and he got 3 free throws to basically win the game.
Right.
Right, and then the next game that they played, they ended up winning against the Washington Wizards. So it's going to be interesting to see, right, because they do have a mix of tough opponents, right? Like the Hawks are not great, but on any given night, they could potentially win a game. The Nuggets, right, the Jazz, who've been playing really, really well. Right now, they've won, I think, 8 of their last 10. Just had 3 games where they blew out the Nuggets, the Bucks, and the Mavs, I believe.
Yeah.
So that's a relatively tough team in Utah as well. They play the Kings. They play Portland, not that great. Phoenix, Denver, Philly. So kind of a tough stretch without him. I mean, the main thing is how does the offense look? Because I don't think the defense really changes a whole lot, regardless of whether or not Halliburton plays. But
Right.
offensively, right, the whole team is kind of built around him as the engine, where he has the ball in his hands a ton. So I do wonder, how it changes, right? Because obviously against the Wizards, they only scored 112 points, which is way below their average. I mean, they're
Yes.
averaging what 127 or whatever points a game. And the Wizards are not a great defensive team, so
One of the
that
worst.
yeah, so that's probably what we're going to see where, they're not going to score quite as many points, and then it'll kind of come down to, can they potentially get just enough stops to be able to win? And, against some teams they may be able to, and then others probably not so much. But obviously it is a big injury because, last year he got hurt and missed a significant amount of time, and they were not able to make up for his absence, right? Because they were in the playoff mix last season before he got hurt, which I
Yeah.
think is one of the reasons why a lot of people were high on them going into the season based off of what they saw when he was healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but now he's going to be out again for an extended period of time. So the question is now, is the roster better enough to kind of make up for his absence? Because obviously there's no replacing, your best player, especially when, it's somebody as good as he is and somebody that does the things that he can do. But, can they hang on, just enough to not completely fall in the standings? I mean, if you look at, the Eastern Conference standings right now, right, they're basically the 4 seed, tied with the Knicks, right? So, and then once you go to, 6, 7, and 8, all 3 of those teams, right, basically have one more loss, right? The Cavs have the same amount of losses as the Pacers and the Knicks, but then the Heat and the Magic have 16. So basically, if you lose a couple of games, maybe just 2 or 3, then all of a sudden you're back down to that 8 spot. And then the Bulls, right, who, we kind of thought we would almost never talk about again at one point, now they've been on a tear as of late.
Yeah.
Now they've gotten some of their other guys back who were out, like Levine, like Vucevic. So now they've started to win some more games, right? So, you don't want to fall all the way from like 4 to 9, but in fairness, it is close. So if you can just hang on and maybe be 500, then that will probably be able to get it done. And I guess, do you think that that's reasonable for this roster, or do you think they'll probably not be able to do that? Because I think some of the opponents are kind of tough, and I think that's where things may get difficult. If it was like a super easy schedule where you're playing, mostly like, some of the bottom feeder teams, that'd be one thing. But some of those teams are hard, right? Like Denver, Philly, Phoenix, assuming guys are available, that can be tough.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they do have Denver coming up. They have Sacramento coming up, Phoenix, Denver again, Philly, Phoenix again. So it's like you said, it's a tough schedule, and a guy, who's averaging around 24 points. He leads the NBA in assists, 4 rebounds a game. I just think that's irreplaceable. You can't replace it. I think they're going to struggle immensely. I think it'll be TJ McConnell probably backing filling in for Halliburton. And I just don't think TJ McConnell will be able to do what Halliburton can do.
I think
Who?
Nemhard is.
Okay, Nemhard.
Started.
Okay. Well, regardless, whether it be McConnell or Nemhard, I just don't think that it's going to be
Right.
they're not going to be able to do what Halliburton can do, and that's the hard part. And like you said, the defense is going to change, so it's not like, okay, once Halliburton's out, the defense is going to get better. Nope, it's still going to be the same sorry defense. The offense is going to be arguably worse. So I just don't think it's going to translate to a lot of wins. We could probably see them slip, but I think once he comes back, I think it'll look a whole lot better for them. But I don't think it would be too much to worry about, because I think regardless where they are, I think we know that they're going to be a playoff team. It's just like, who are they going to match up against in the first round? That's what I would be concerned about more so in terms of like standings and whatnot. But, I think they have time. I think it's better that this happened kind of like in this area, horrible that an injury happened in the first place, but I think you would probably want it to happen around this time than post All-Star break.
Yeah. If I'm the Pacers, I think playoff wise, you want to try to get home court if you can. So,
Absolutely.
you want to you're aiming for a top 4 seed, which is doable, right? Because I mean, out after Boston, I mean, the other teams, right? If they start losing a few games here and there, right? They're gonna drop, right? The Bucks have been playing, kind of poorly as of late. Although, I mean, they just destroyed Boston so badly that they sat their starters after the first half. But
Yeah.
regardless, so they're kind of there. But then after that, right, like the Sixers, now Embiid has missed some time with some knee swelling, and they say he's going to try to play through it, but how effective is he going to be? So then if they kind of start losing some games, they might start slipping. And then the Knicks have been, I think, undefeated since the Anunoby trade, right? The Cavs have been able to hang on with all these guys out, which is pretty impressive. And then
Yeah.
the have kind of found some ways to win here and there. And then the Magic have slid right since the early part of the season because they've had so many injuries. But um, so yeah, I think you're right in the sense of like there's not too much to be worried about yet because like the standings are so close
Mm-hmm.
um that like if you lose a few games you could probably get back. It's just a matter of how long is he actually going to be out because
Right.
again, reevaluated in 2 weeks or whatever doesn't mean you're going to come back in 2 weeks. It could mean that you're 2 weeks away from being 2 weeks away,
Yeah.
or
And I thought the injury was worse than it
right,
what
yeah.
was reported. I thought it was going to be way way worse. And
The
it
first
sucks
thing
cuz
that's
he's going to be an all-star again. So,
right, and that's the first thing that is good news that it's not it's not like a grade 2 or 3 where
right.
he'd be out, for a really long time or potentially have surgery, which would keep him out even longer, which you don't want, right,
Right.
for either him or the Pacers, right, because then you'd be in real trouble. So at the
Yeah.
very least, if he's out for like at least a couple more weeks, and they're like 500, by the time he comes back, like not in terms of their actual record, but in terms of the games they've been able to play while he's out,
Yes.
then that's probably can't ask for too much more than that because it's pretty hard to win, a lot of games without your best player.
Look at
Um,
Memphis.
yeah, 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 exactly, just like Memphis, right? Because again, Desmond Bain and Jaren Jackson Jr. are good players, right? I mean, they would be the second best players on Indiana, or if they either one of them if they were on
Absolutely.
Indiana, and they couldn't really win too many games without him. I mean, they just won a couple without him, but I mean, they've only won 13 games, so
Yeah.
it's not like they're world beaters without Josh. So
Exactly.
yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes, but it's something to keep an eye on because again, they're not in the same position as Memphis, right? Where it's like, your season is already over, right? Like Indiana's season is still in a good spot. You just kind of have to hope that maybe he comes back sooner rather than later, and
Yeah.
then you don't completely fall off because that's what happened last year, where they just fell off, and then by the time he came back, they just couldn't make up enough ground.
Yeah, because I think they were around like what 5 or 6 last year, and
Yeah,
then they just fell below the Wizards at one point, and then like yeah, it's wild.
yeah, they were able to stay a top 6 seed until he got hurt, and then he was, like I
Yeah,
said, he was just out for a while, and then unfortunately, it was rough.
yeah,
So, um, but yeah, so regardless, yeah, injuries suck. I mean, that's kind of the story of
yeah,
these situations. I mean, like it's just bad because again, those guys are so important to their teams, and everybody loves seeing them play. So when they're out, and especially a case like Ja where we won't see him at all until next season. I mean, that's just the worst.
yeah, and that basically means your season goes down the drain, especially if your star is injured, because injuries are happening every night. It's just when these stars get hurt, it gets talked about so much because it impacts the team in a completely different way.
Yeah. So I guess we'll get into before the Darko thing. I guess we'll get into the Warriors,
All right.
uh, situation or whatever. So they played the other night, against the New Orleans Pelicans, and it was a game. It was a game that was played, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was played with any level of seriousness, at least from one team. It was 141 to 105, and it was New Orleans that came out with the win. In San Francisco at home, the second straight game that the Warriors got booed off the floor. I mean, booed at halftime, as well as I believe the worst home loss in the Steve Kerr era for the Warriors.
Yep.
And they have not led a single time in the last couple of games. Um, After the game, some pretty, I guess, I don't know if I don't think borderline is the right word. I would say alarming is kind of the word. I mean, it's to be honest, I wouldn't say it's much of a surprise, but it is kind of a surprise given who it's from, right? Where like, Curry, after the game, they asked him about, whether or not they need, some type of, shake up or some type of move. And he basically said, it's pretty evident, quote, if that if things stay the same, that's the definition of insanity, right? Keep doing the same thing, but expecting different results. I thought he said the actual quote was, I thought he said the same results, which is kind of wrong. But regardless,
Yeah.
either way, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I mean, the game was horrible from the Warriors' perspective. Again, blown out. You look at the standings in the West right now, they have dropped to 12. I mean, because again, we already talked about the Jazz where they've been on a tear as of late, and they went from, being completely awful to now they're better than Golden State by, I believe they're up a game ahead, but they have two more wins, albeit they've played two more games. But yeah, this is starting to get pretty rough. And then, after the game, in addition to that quote, right, you had the quotes from both Steph and Clay where they were asked about the fans booing, and it was two very different responses, right? Steph said, quote, I'm booing myself. It's our job to give them something to cheer about, and we have not done that. And then Clay said, I don't care. You're
Yeah.
supposed to lose sleep over that. So a lot of stuff going on. And then even Steve Kerr, right? He basically, gave another quote that basically kind of said like that the team is pretty dejected, right? They've pretty much lost, a ton of confidence, a ton of spirit. And again, I don't think you can argue against that, right? I mean, they had that first stretch when Draymond was out where I think they had won 5 in a row, but we kind of pointed out that those were not necessarily the best teams that they were playing against
Yep.
outside of Boston. And even that one, I think that had more to do with how awful Boston was, in terms of just hitting any shots, to close out the game. And since then, they've been playing teams that are, better, right? And then it's been bad. So I don't really know at this point. I don't think the roster as currently constructed is salvageable. Like, I definitely think that you have to make some type of trade, but I also don't really know what the trade is. I know that Siakam has been mentioned, but now, like, a lot of reports at times have suggested that there's more apprehension from Toronto to do it, or at the very least from Siakam, he wants a max deal. I don't know if that means that not every team is just willing to give him one. Maybe that's the case, but if it's not him, I don't know. And I mean, maybe it doesn't have to be a star, but I mean, just in general, it's been absolutely awful. I mean, we kind of talked about in the off season. It was so strange where, I remember last season, right? I think I overestimated them, and then after seeing them in the postseason, it kind of felt like that it was probably done in terms of like them being able to win another title. I think both you and I acknowledged that they could be better than they were last year, but I think we also both said that they probably wouldn't be quite good enough to get out of the West. I think
Yeah.
we both, kind of
Yeah.
felt
They are
that.
not our favorites.
Right, yeah. Kind of funny that the three teams that we thought after Denver right now are all basically playing teams, or one of them is actually out of the plan as of right now in
Yeah.
Golden State. But just regardless, it just felt like the way that they lost last year didn't seem like something where it's like, oh, this can be fixed with one move. You know what I mean? Like, I
Sure.
know it was a 6 game series, but it felt like, yeah, you don't have enough size. You didn't have enough outside of Steph that consistently shows up, right? They moved on from Jordan Poole. They brought in Chris Paul, which, I mean, I understood it, and I never had an issue with it on offense. I just felt like, defensively, I mean, does that fix what was going on with Golden State? Because, I mean, Golden State wasn't that great defensively last year. It got better in the playoffs, but, you know, defense was not a strong suit of theirs last year. And this year it's gotten worse, I believe. In terms of the advanced stats, right, in terms of defensive rating, they are 23rd in defense, right? And that's after this New Orleans game. So the defense has been bottom third of the league, which is bad. Offensively, they are eighth, which is cool. But again, you can't be, even if you're top 10 in one category, you can't be a contender if you're bottom third in another category, kind of like what we talked about um, with LA before. So I guess the question is, how do you fix this team? And I guess the other question is there even a fix to this team? Or at the very least, is there something that can fix it enough? I mean, like, because that would be my question. Because I mean, you
Yeah.
look at the standings, they're not out of it completely, right? Because they're only a couple of games back from these other teams. It's just, I mean, again, like, as currently constructed, I just don't see it. Because again, Wiggins, it's gotten to a point where, I mean, we're halfway through the season and he's still, pretty much just looks like he just doesn't have it. So, I mean, I don't really expect that to turn around. So I think he's at a point now where I think they're going to, he's no longer a guy that they're not thinking about trading, right? I think if they're going to make a trade, he's probably the number one guy, maybe even ahead of Chris Paul, just because, Chris Paul has at least brought something to this team in terms of the second unit. Even though he's out, obviously, for a while, right, because of the broken hand or fractured hand or whatever. The young guys, right, Kuminga and Moody. I mean, Moody's playing, I guess. He just played because guys were out, but then he just got hurt. Um, and before that, right, after, there was a report of him being unhappy, then he started playing again
Yeah.
after being out of the rotation, right? Kuminga, right, he put out there he was unhappy. And I just don't necessarily know if that's like a sustainable environment. I mean, I understand that, like these guys are playing now, but like say Draymond comes back, maybe that can fix the defense, but you still have some other issues, right? Then it pushes Kuminga to the bench. He's not going to play as much as he would like. So, like I said, I definitely think that a trade or something needs to happen. And then, before you, add your thoughts, then we also got to factor in, remember at the end of the season, right? You had Bob Myers, right? He left the team, right? And actually, funny enough, right? Now he's working for the Washington Commanders, right? So he
Yep.
switched sports.
Yeah,
That's how
he's
bad it
Josh
was.
Harris's personal assistant, which is the owner
Right.
for the 76ers and the Washington Commanders.
So, he kind of, I guess, in a way, I mean, we talked about it where we were like, okay, that's kind of a concern, right? That the guy that helped put together, multiple Warriors, championship teams. I know he didn't do everything, right? But he was a big part of it. And he left, right? I think he kind of saw the writing on the wall. And like in fairness, I don't think that like the current people have like made horrible moves, right? Because
Mm,
again, Paul, I mean, it hasn't led really to wins, but I guess it has helped the second unit. But more importantly, I think the guys that they drafted, were have played pretty well. And then obviously, some of the minimum like Saric, um, and a couple others, right? I think those were good, but by and large, it does feel like there's a big problem. And I think the team is this iteration of the team, this current iteration, I definitely think is cooked. So I think they're gonna have to figure out a way to make some type of move. But like I said, I don't really know what it is because I don't, like I said, I don't know if they're gonna be able to get Siakam. Maybe they do. I mean, I know they mentioned we don't want to give up Kaminga. Sure, okay. I mean,
yeah.
I know they mentioned I think the day before Jordan Poole was traded, I think Mike Dunleavy was like, "Yeah, we see him as part of our core for the next several years." And then less than 24 hours later, he was moved. We've been there before,
Yeah.
so um but regardless, I guess that's the question, like, is this potentially even viable to be saved? And if it is, what the heck do you even do?
Yeah. Can we acknowledge that this dynasty is over? Honestly, I think it's done. At least the trio of Curry, Clay, and Dre. Like, I don't really have an issue with Curry. I mean, yes, there's times where in the losses he hasn't played well, but at the same time, his individual numbers are very good. He's not the reason they're losing. Cool. We got that out of the way. But goodness gracious, I don't even know like where to start because there's so many like holes. It reminds me of the Lakers situation where it's like there's a clear disconnect. Steph and Clay are not on the same page. Then you have Steve Kerr talking about we're lacking confidence, and then you get to a stage where you lose your belief. So it seems like everybody has a differing opinion on what the problem is, and that tells me that there's like countless problems. You know what I mean? There's so many
Yeah.
problems. And then I think another quote from Kerr, which I found probably the most intriguing, because you don't really hear too many things about bad leadership in the Warriors locker room. He said one of the coaches said we're the quietest team ever. So basically saying, guys are not very vocal, which is interesting. So that's probably a sign that this is the beginning of the end, or we may already be at the end, because this is rough. You've already lost some guys, you've traded people, like you said, Jordan Poole. I think that was probably one of the first steps that we noticed that the punch it went punch, trade, Draymond antics, losses, and now people are speaking out. So I think there's going to be more steps. There's going to be probably more trades, but I think we do have to acknowledge that the core of Steph, Clay, and Drake can probably never win another championship. Curry, I think, can probably get another ring, but the three of them together, I think, you've got to move on at some point. It probably won't be this season, but I think, they will be moving on from at least one of those three guys, and it's definitely not going to be Curry. I think it's probably going to be maybe Clay or something like that. And then, like you said, Wiggins is not playing well. that does not help the case.
I
And then the young
think that
guys, that's created an entire rift. It seems like it's two separate teams at times, with the young guys being in and then them playing. And then you got the castaways, which are like Kaminga and Moody, who are like, well, we're part of this team as well. Then, they get minutes and then they still get blown out by 36 points. So I'm not really sure what the remedy is. I don't think there is one right now. I think, we just have to acknowledge that they're just not as good. I think the NBA has kind of adapted to what their system is, playing that small ball. I think, we're in a new era, new age where, it's all about skill and height. Not to say, that Curry can't, put up the numbers that he does, because he clearly does. And he's not a tall, athletic guy, but he's different. He's a different breed. I think, you have to put him in a category of his own. But, the prototypical NBA roster is not structured like this. There's I don't know. They have some good pieces, but it's just not enough. I think they've just aged out. I don't know what the right wording would be to say it. They're just not the team that we're used to.
Yeah, I mean, because again, I think we both thought that they were in the tier, after Denver, where like, they're a contender, but they wouldn't necessarily be a favorite.
Right.
But they've definitely been,
Fraudulent
honestly.
this year.
Well,
Bad.
I mean, because, and like I said, it's interesting how the Suns, the Lakers, and the Warriors are all, in that play-in mix where they're all basically around 500.
Right.
Um, and which is kind of interesting. I mean, obviously for them, the regular season is different just because, some of the guys on their teams like treat the regular season a little bit differently, I think, oftentimes than the postseason. But I think with the Warriors, that one is, I think, the most, troubling, I guess, in terms of as currently constructed, mainly just because, like, at least with the Suns, you can point to, like, they've not had very many games together with their main guys. And they
Sure.
also just have, like, a lot of great guys after the top three.
Sure.
So it's like,
They were probably the
like,
most likely to implode.
so you're kind of banking on those three guys playing well and then having just enough. But, for them, it's not enough. Right with LA, you're banking on the LeBron and AD plus depth. But then, like, the depth hasn't always been consistent. And then with the Warriors, right, like, unlike the other teams, right, you don't really have, like, a second guy, alongside Steph that's, like, in a similar tier. Like, LeBron and AD are in similar tiers, right? Durant and Booker are in similar tiers, but you don't have that in Golden State.
Yep.
And then, it worked, a couple seasons ago because you just had, like you said, a lot of really quality players, right? That may not necessarily have been superstars, but like, solid guys on both ends of the floor, guys
Yes.
that were consistent. And like, they've not been very consistent this year. I mean, and like I said, I think Wiggins is probably the toughest one
Yep.
to crack because he's the guy that I think makes some of these other groupings make a little bit more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because we saw that the championship year, right? Where, when they would go small, he'd play at the four and he'd still be able to get you rebounds and play defense and
Yep.
attack the basket. But he's not done any of that this year. And that makes it rough because, and even, besides attacking the basket, he could also shoot. Um, and so now you're in this weird spot where, like, now either he comes off the bench or, like, I think he started in that Raptors game, but was basically unplayable because, we already mentioned it, him and Kaminga just doesn't work.
Yep.
Especially this version of Wiggins, it doesn't work with
Yeah.
Kaminga, right? I think Wiggins, from the title year where he's shooting well, that's fine. But, this version where he's just not a threat from basically anywhere, that just doesn't work. So I think that's kind of that's not the only issue, but I think that's definitely one of the bigger ones that arguably your second best player on the title team a couple years ago is now one of your worst guys,
Yep.
right? And
No
that's
Jordan
rough.
Poole along with that. Doesn't
Right,
help.
and then exactly, right? And then you replace him with Chris Paul, who's been good off the bench as a second unit guy, but now he's hurt. And that was the concern that I had with him, where I just did not trust that he would be able to stay healthy,
Yeah.
and he hasn't. And then also in addition to that, I didn't expect them to improve defensively, which they haven't. They've gotten worse. Now, a lot of that also is because Draymond's out, but
Yeah.
even when he's there, I mean, like, other than the beginning part of the season, right, they were not like a great defensive team.
Yeah.
So, and that's due to the lack of size. So that's where I think you kind of have to just kind of look back and just kind of figure out, what's going on. And, obviously with the Steph quote, right, that's kind of rare territory for him because he's not normally like a guy that, is, looked at as like when the team struggles, he speaks out and is like, yeah, we need, major changes. I mean, a lot of that has just been because the team has been good. So I don't think he's had to worry about like the quality of the roster, right? Because the 2 years where they were out of the playoffs, the team wasn't that good anyway, so you
And he
couldn't
was
really
hurt.
complain. Yeah, like he was hurt, and there were no expectations, right?
Right.
So, like, but now this is the season where obviously we know there was a lot of turmoil in the locker room last year, and then we heard a lot about how in this offseason, like, oh, everybody's happy, everybody's getting along,
Right.
staying together, and now it's back to everybody's being quiet again, and like you said, not talking,
Yeah.
according to Steve Kerr, and I think that's because there's a realization that set in about, yeah, we're not as good as we thought, not even close.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a rude
and
awakening.
that's Right, yeah, and that's where again it's tough because the Western Conference has gotten better and they have not, right? I mean, I think there was a belief that they had gotten better because again, like, you moved out a guy who didn't play well last year in Jordan Poole for Chris Paul, who's a steadier hand, drafted some young players who help. You got to stretch big in Charge as opposed to not really having one last season, right? I guess that was supposed to be JaMychal Green, but didn't really do a whole lot. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it just hasn't worked. So that's where I think again they're going to just have to take an approach. Unlike the Suns and the Lakers, I think they have more to move, like in the sense of like I think they have more that guys would want. More so like Kaminga, because I don't know if people really want Wiggins at this point. It's just a matter of whether or not a team actually thinks that he can be salvageable. Maybe he can, but it's still a long-term contract as well. And if you're getting a version that's similar to this, then like you don't really
You
want
don't
to touch
want
that.
that. Yeah.
You have Chris Paul as an expiring, which I guess is nice. I don't know how much they really want to move him, but I mean, like, you're gonna have to move one of those big contract guys if you want like an actual difference maker. Just moving Kaminga on his own, who doesn't make a whole lot, isn't enough. Like, you're gonna need to do something and bring in a real difference maker, or else they're gonna be in a spot where either they kind of get back into the plan and then probably not go far, or they don't even make it. Because again, I mean, the good news is for them at least, because of Memphis's situation, Memphis isn't really going to catch up to you. But you still got to get ahead of these other couple of teams, right? Because they're 12, right? So the Jazz are currently above them. I don't feel like that's probably going to stay, but I mean the Jazz have been playing better as of late, so you just never know. And then obviously at 9 and 10 is the Lakers and Houston, and I feel like those teams just feel like they're kind of on a better track right now compared to Golden State. Um, so we'll see, but it's definitely been rough. So I mean, it's tough because, like I said, I thought that they would be, in the mix. I thought, but I also just didn't feel like they had enough, based off of what I thought about the roster, and that's why again, that's why preseason it always fools everybody, including us, because there was stuff that we saw from some of these other teams in
Yeah.
preseason, that kind of that kind of tricked us. So
Absolutely.
that's why, yeah. So that's a lesson learned where preseason doesn't really mean a whole lot. I mean, they were
And
undefeated.
we
I think
started our videos by saying, like, yeah, preseason doesn't mean a whole lot. Then we base some stuff off of preseason. It was funny.
right. So that's kind of the lesson learned. I mean, ultimately, is that yeah, preseason doesn't necessarily mean. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, the Thunder up 62 on the Blazers. Okay, so
All right. W.
um, yeah. So regardless, um, should we talk about the Darko thing, I guess, or should we
Yes,
go into,
please.
or should we go into? All right, so
Darko.
Raptors coach Darko Rajakovic, right? We talked about them hiring him, in the offseason, and the Raptors they've gone on an impressive run, I think, since they've made the trade. Obviously,
Yes.
they've lost the last couple of games, right? One to the Clippers, one to LA. Siakam is now hurt, so that obviously hasn't helped as well. But they've definitely looked better, I think, much more competitive since the trade. Just acquiring two pieces and Quickly and Barrett, you got two other scorers, right? Quickly can shoot. Barrett's played very well. Um, Unfortunately, now Jakob Hurtle is hurt,
Yeah.
right? That is, that's kind of tough because he's really their only real center, right? Now they've been starting Thaddeus Young at center, right? And he started against the Lakers, which leads us into the next discussion. Speaking of Thaddeus Young, right, where basically, he went on a pretty lengthy rant, where he was very upset, and again, I would probably not be happy, in terms of like how you lost in terms of like the disparity, but basically he said a lot of stuff like, quote, this is completely BS, this is shame for the referees, shame for the league. If that's the case, just let us know so we don't show up for the game. So needless to say, I guess he wasn't all that happy, I suppose. I mean,
No.
maybe I missed something, but I don't think he was that happy. um so I'll get into the free throws because, in fairness, I did watch the game. I did not have power, because my power went out, but I was able to watch it on my phone. So I did watch it, which was kind of funny.
Yeah.
So that lets you know how committed I am,
W
to
Laker
this,
fan.
to this podcast, to this basketball thing. Um, so in the fourth quarter, right, it was 23-2, I believe, in terms of the free throw discrepancy. To start off, the last, I want to say 8 to 10 free throws, right, were basically like take free throws where the game was kind of basically over. So they had no choice but to foul Anthony Davis and send him to the free throw line multiple times. And then they would, try to score, quickly on the other end, right? Kind of smart, right? Where they didn't even use a timeout until one of the last possessions, which got them closer. They ended up winning by one, or excuse me, losing by one because Siakam hit a three right at the end. So it was really like a 4-point game. But yeah, like the last 8 or 10 free throws, I think, were basically take fouls. So pretty much within the last 2 minutes, um, it was a lot of take fouls. I know that um, I think the fouls that they kind of had an issue with, I think one of them was the offensive foul, if I'm not mistaken. That was called on RJ Barrett. I think
RJ, yeah.
he set a screen
Yep.
on AD to free Barnes up for a three, and he
Yep.
made the three, and it was waved off. And then I think there was another one, right? Was it the Max Christie one? I think was the one
Yes.
where like up and he got fouled. Um, but the funny thing is that so they put out the 2 minute report, and this is why everybody, including myself, hates the last 2 minute report. In more ways than one, because like I understand it in terms of transparency, but it always makes things worse for one team or the
Yes.
other. Because if it's right, then you're just mad because it's like, well, you're still wrong, even though like it literally says like, we made the right call. Then
Right.
if it's wrong, right, then you feel bad because you know and understand that you basically got cheated, right? We talked
Yes.
about, last year with, a couple of games, that came down to the wire, right? Like, the Lakers Celtics one, right? Where
Yeah.
like
With the
LeBron
foul.
gets
Yep.
fouled, yeah, at the end, and then they didn't call it. And then, unlike what they would do with the last 2 minute report, they came out right after the game and said it was a foul and put on Twitter, yeah, we're sorry. We had a lot of sleepless nights, which was weird. But in this game,
Whatever.
which is the funny part of the last 2 minute report, not only was every call actually correct, there were actually two calls that they actually missed that would have actually made it worse for Toronto. So one of them was a foul with RJ Barrett where he basically made contact with AD's right wrist that caused him to lose control of the ball. And I think it was just a no call. And then there was another one where it was an offensive foul on Scotty Barnes, where I think he was driving to the basket and kind of booted Austin Reeves out the way using his size, where they, and they basically said, yeah, he did it in like an illegal way. Yeah, moved into Reeves' path without establishing himself in a screening position. Okay, so he wasn't driving, he was screening and delivers illegal contact that affects his ability to defend. So I guess like kind of like, like one of those plays where another guy's coming in and then you like kind of move into the way
Yeah.
and then prevent them from scoring. So that's kind of the funny part. So on the one hand, I actually appreciate the coach, talking like in terms of like backing up his players, even though like technically he isn't really right. But if I'm one of the Raptors players, right, having a coach that I know has my back and is willing to, support me, and willing to get fined tens of thousands of dollars, that's a good feeling, right? Because again, you should feel good about that. But on the other hand, I don't know how he's feeling after that, considering, now, in the last 2 minute report, pretty much most of the calls that they made were actually correct, and the ones that they missed would not have benefited them. But either way, there's always like a couple of games, right? That we always end up talking about. And I know like whenever it's like a game, one of those type of games where it's a big free throw discrepancy in different points. It's a conversation. But, I just in fairness, I did want to throw out like the last half of the free throws were take fouls. And, I mentioned Thaddeus Young. That was the guy that was guarding Anthony Davis for a good chunk of the game. And I actually liked Thaddeus Young, for a while he was in the league, but he's not really a center. He's like 6'8", and he's also an older guy. And it's just, again, that's this thing that is unfortunate with the Raptors, where Pirtle is out, so you don't have a center. And against a guy like AD, you need at least one, kind of big-ish guy to be able to stick with him. I mean, he had 41 points, and only missed 4 shots, 13 to 17. And then after that, right, then you got to factor in, now Siakam's out, so that sucks. And again, it also sucks to lose. You know what I mean? Like, it also sucks to lose, in like a way where you feel like it wasn't really your fault. I mean, they did foul a lot, but those type of losses are the ones that hurt. And that's why, like, that's the thing, like, in a lot of these close games where, like, it's kind of important to try to put yourself in a position where you don't leave it up to the refs. I mean, I think that there are much more egregious examples of this that we've seen, um, including like Lakers games, but like just in general, I mean, like, this isn't the one that I would probably get mad about, but at the same
Mm.
time, I can at the very least understand the frustration because it is frustrating. Like, if you're, kind of defending a team and like all you can really do is foul, but I'm gonna be honest, sometimes all you can really do is foul. I mean, like, what we talked about with the Warriors, in that Christmas game, right, against the Nuggets, right, where like a lot of those calls were kind of whack. But at the same time, I mean, they don't have anybody big enough to contend with Jokic. So I mean, if you're gonna put a small guy on him, I mean, good luck. That's all I'm gonna say. When you're putting a smaller defender on a bigger player, unless it's kind of like a strong guy, like maybe like a Draymond or somebody like that, I don't think you have much of a chance. If I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. This whole situation was very funny the first time I saw it on
Yeah.
my social media because I'm not gonna lie, the guy's accent makes it 10 times funnier. So if you haven't watched the clip, please go and find the clip. It's hilarious. But I do understand his fire. I do understand his passion. I think one point is like the discrepancy is what he's really, really mad at. He's not mad at like, okay, they got 24. He's mad that they got 24 and they got two in the
Right.
fourth, which is the crazy part. And I think, there is some sort of like, I don't know. I didn't watch the game, so like I'm not probably the best person to speak on it, but I'm going to assume that if the coach is talking about Scotty Barnes, who's a big guy who gets to the rack very efficiently, I would assume he's going to get, I think fouled a lot and maybe like hand checked, maybe like some petty fouls. But I think what he's talking about is maybe the petty fouls were called for the Lakers, but they weren't called for Toronto, in terms of favor. I think that's probably what he's hinting at. But goodness gracious, I mean, the guy was on a rant. Like it was actually gold to watch.
Yeah.
But for Toronto, I mean, you can't be too mad at it. I mean, you're sitting at 15 and 23, but every game does count to these guys clearly. And I think like you said, you'd want a coach that does fight for this. We don't see this normally in the regular season. I think we see this in the postseason more often than not, where it's like coaches get a little bit more fiery towards the refs when talking about calls and lack of calls and stuff like that. So to see it in the regular season from a team that's not the greatest, they're bottom four team in the East, but they have been winning as of recently. They lost two in a row, excuse me, but, they've been looking better recently than what they had before the Anunoby trade. But yeah, I get it. I get the rant. I can't really say if I agree or not, because like I said, I didn't really watch it. But it's tough. It's tough. Sometimes you just lose games, and they might have lost this game without the free throw stuff. Who knows? But I think the funniest thing was LeBron's response. I think he kind of just nonchalantly was like, I mean, they fouled. What is he talking about? Like like I said, it's comedy, man. It's comedy.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this last year where, a big part of the Lakers' attack on both ends of the floor was they were a team that was really good at getting to the free throw line and also very good at defending without fouling. And that's a pretty tough combination to go against, especially if you are a team that's not equipped to defend them without fouling. Because, it's one thing if you're a team that doesn't foul a lot as well, going against a team like LA that gets to the line a lot, because maybe you might be able to take some of that away. But again, like, just in terms of the profile for that team, they had a lot of big guys at other positions, but just not at the center spot. And, for guys like LeBron and AD who can live at the basket at times, that's a tough combo, to be able to, to try to contend with. Just,
Yeah,
for one, and again, in the regular season for one game, that's a lot different than a 7-game series. Just
exactly.
because, you're just coming in, you're just, Toronto's coming into LA, right? They don't have to go back to LA and play them again they don't go to LA at all. They go to Toronto. But regardless, like, it's not a game plan that you come up with, like, way, way in advance, right? Like, you have the set game plans, but it's not like in the playoffs where you have it and then you can adjust it, a couple days later before you play again. So, I mean, like I said, I already mentioned, I understand why he's mad, but we also don't have to always make it like a, like a conspiracy thing because, I know, I know it's kind of like a popular thing to talk about like rigging games, but I mean
Yeah,
like,
like
they
scripts.
had an opportunity to rig it last year where, we could have had like a Lakers Celtics finals and we did not.
Yeah, they
So,
sold the bag with that. That probably would have been one of the most watched finals of all time.
yeah, but yeah, so, either way, like you said, really funny, very
Yeah,
entertaining. Because I didn't even initially know about it, and then like 5 minutes after the game, it just like boom went
yeah.
immediately
He was going
viral.
berserk. Like it was
Right,
bad.
like yeah, exactly. I mean, props to him. I mean, again, like I said, I mean, you want a coach that is willing to kind of stand up for your team. I mean, that was just fun. It's
Yeah,
just funny. I mean, it was entertaining. So I appreciate him giving us a very viral moment, right?
yeah,
To say like we didn't get any viral moment. I mean, like we got like a couple of viral moments in the game, right? Like with guys kind of like talking back and forth. Like there was a stretch where like R.J. Barrett and D'Angelo Russell were like getting into it, and then I
yeah,
think D'Angelo Russell didn't speak to the media for 2 games in a row, which is interesting.
yeah,
But regardless, yeah, this was a good moment. I think this is kind of like one of those things where when we look back on this season, we'll remember this because it was pretty funny. And now he's establishing himself, as a head coaching name as well. Because I don't know how many people actually knew who the Raptors coach, was. I mean, obviously, if you follow the NBA, you may know, but like
yeah,
probably not, because again, the Raptors are a popular team, in a big market, but at the
yeah,
same time, right, like they're not usually a team that's like gossiped or talked about, the way that some of these other teams are. So props to him.
yeah, for sure.
Um, so now I guess we'll get into news, rumors, and whatnot. Pretty much that's been going on. So we'll start off with a couple of extensions, right? So Kawhi Leonard, right? He signed, I believe, a 3-year, $152 million extension, right? So this was kind of something that we talked about in the offseason and going into this season, right? Was, there's a lot on the line for the Clippers this season. They were one of the teams that we talked about was under a lot of pressure in the summer to do something because, again, in 4 seasons together, only one conference finals appearance. Um, and then other than that, basically injuries have derailed every other season. But now finally you have a season where Kawhi and Paul George are about as healthy can be. They made that big trade to acquire Harden, and they've been, one of the best teams in the NBA. The last, I guess, what, month and a half or whatever. I mean, it's been, I mean, obviously it was initially pretty rough, where they lost like 6, 7 in a row when they first got Harden, but they figured it out. And again, that's why we liked the trade for both teams because we felt that both teams, solved some issues that they had. Where with the Clipper or with the Sixers, you got rid of a guy that clearly didn't want to be there, and you gave yourself some more flexibility. And then with the Clippers, you just get a better player that can help, kind of organize and quarterback your offense, right? Because we know that they needed a point guard, and now I know, and I know like a lot of Clipper fans because we had one, right? Xander Cade, right? Where he
Yeah,
was kind of apprehensive about the idea of adding Harden, but now you can see, the value of having him on the team because it just makes your offense, a little bit more dynamic, right? You can go to more things, and now that these guys are learning how to play and be more comfortable playing alongside one another, because we talked about how they didn't really like doing a lot of stuff, for each other, but now they're playing off each other a lot better, and now they have a better roster for it, right? And now a better chance, right? Better than it would have been had they just kind of left it, as constructed before. And now you're in a position where now Kawhi's happy enough where he signed an extension. They said Paul George is up next. So that will be good. And then Harden, he can't sign one because his contract wasn't long enough, but you assume that they would sign him to a new contract in the offseason. So now, the front office has done, the stuff that those guys have wanted. Now it's up to them, the players to be able to see, if they can pull it off this season. And they have a chance. I mean, now they have a legitimate chance at being able to come out of the West because, now Kawhi, he's back to being, a top tier player.
yeah,
And then obviously you got Paul George and Harden, right, as your secondary pieces, right? And then you have other players at other positions like Zubac, like Westbrook coming off the bench, Norman Powell. I mean, I still think they should probably, Tice as the backup big. I still think they should probably add one more piece, but as long as they're healthy, I think that now they are definitely in the mix. Whereas I wouldn't have had them in there before, but now I think they are. So that's good, news if you're the Clippers because now you got you guys locked up for a while, and now you have a team that your fans could root for going into next year as well. because they're going to be in that new arena. So this is
Yeah.
all good for the Clippers. Great
Yeah,
for them.
it's great. And the thing that I like about it is it's mutual because I think a lot of people aren't really talking about the pay cut that actually occurred as well. Because I think he's leaving, a lot of money on the table to extend the contract. So that also makes it easier for Paul George and Harden when I guess whenever that time comes for Harden. But regardless, they're making it easy on each other, which is good. The organization isn't holding out on anything, and the players hopefully won't hold out on each other, in terms of being greedy or anything like that, because they have been winning and they've been on a tear. I've been really hyped and impressed with the quick turnaround that they had, because I think it was about 5 or 6 games that were really bad for them, and we were like, okay, we gotta see some wins. Yeah, we got to see some
Lost like 6
wins,
in a row.
and they have produced. No questions asked. I think they have put themselves in the driver's seat of their own destiny. I think they're better than a lot of teams. And this is kind of where we wanted to see them, I guess. Maybe not so much you because you're the Laker fan, but all bias aside and stuff like that. Like we did feel good and comfortable about what the Clippers
Yeah.
were going to look like coming into the season, pre and post Harden trade. So it's good news that they're gonna be sticking with this core of guys.
Yeah, now it's all up to them to be able to stay healthy,
Yes.
and then be able to, get it done in the postseason.
Yeah. They need
That's
to
what's the
show up.
issue. Yeah, because that's the issue that they just haven't been there, just mainly because of health.
Yeah.
Um, Another extension, except this time it's a coach, right? Eric Spoelstra of the Miami Heat, 8-year, $120 million extension. So
Big
pretty
deal.
much the biggest, for a coach. I mean, obviously it's the longest term one as well, right? Because I think per year it's not quite as much. I think math wise is Monty Williams. Um, but at the same time, right, it's up there in terms of amount, and it's a very long term, which again we know because he's the best coach in the NBA.
Right now,
Um,
yes.
you know, yeah, obviously, he's won 2 titles, with the older Heat core, right, with the big three with
Hmm.
LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. But he has since then. He's been able to get to 2 NBA Finals. Wasn't able to win, but still, it was still an accomplishment to get there when nobody expected either of those Heat teams to get there.
Yeah.
They were also very close to going to a third. Um, and they've still been hanging around this season as well, right? Despite Jimmy Butler missing a ton of time, Tyler Hero missing a ton of time, Bam missed a stretch of time at different points, and there's still like a top, 5 or whatever seed in the Eastern Conference with some potential room to grow if these guys can stay healthy. So it's all well deserved, and I'm very curious to see, where he takes, this Heat team next, because obviously, you know, by the time we get into say like year 4 or 5 of this contract, this team presumably would look a little bit different, right?
Hmm.
Because you'd imagine Butler now he'd be older, so he would either probably be, you know, if not retired, right? Probably not as key of a player anymore,
Sure.
right? Maybe Bam sticks around, but maybe Hero's gone. Who knows, right? But obviously a lot of the other guys are, it'll be a different roster, but now he's gonna kind of be, the guy to kind of lead the Heat, in terms of the present and the future, which is again, it's well deserved because he's the best in the business.
Yeah, and he is their culture. He's the guy, who is clearly built the culture where they're able to kind of just take swings on guys who are rookies, young guys who maybe, aren't on everybody's radar. Boom, they come into the Heat and then they're somewhat, of a star and stuff like that. So, hey, it is what it is. You love to see it. But like you said, very, very well deserved. And, everybody was shouting him out, LeBron, D Wade. And like you said, all the attention, all the money is definitely deserved. And I'm curious to see what new heights they're going to go to. Because I think as long as he's around, their culture will be winning culture.
Yeah. Um, and now, on to the next stretch of news. So now, according to Woes, it seems like that it still has to be, I guess, ratified by the Players Association or whatever. But it looks like the draft format is gonna change, where we're gonna have 2 separate days, I guess. One for round one, one for round two. I mean, we both talked about it. We're not big
No,
on it.
L.
I don't really understand it. Um, because personally, I just don't think as many people watch the second round.
No.
Um, so it's just, and I think the argument was that it makes it easier for the teams to make some moves, I guess, because then it's like you don't have to like, wait, however many minutes or whatever in between rounds, and then you have a day to kind of sit back and relax. But from a fan perspective, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And obviously for us, that would end up changing how we do it, right? Because we did a live stream reacting to the draft, but now we would have to do it like 2 separate days. I know in football it's multiple days, but like the
Yeah,
NBA draft
but
is
that's because
nowhere
there's
near.
7 rounds.
I was gonna say the NBA draft is nowhere near as long. I mean, there's 2 rounds, each consisting of like 30 picks. So I mean, it's just there's no real point. But I can't really say anything about it, because that's what it sounds like they're gonna do. So
Yeah,
can't really, I have no impact on it whatsoever. All I can say is I'm not a fan.
yeah, L decision. I agree wholeheartedly. Like you said, it's not the NFL. They need to take a step back and look at that and how that's gonna impact, the viewership on the draft first of all. But if it's for like league purposes, then it's like okay. I mean, we can't really fight that or say anything. But if it's for the fan stuff, then no, that's such a L.
Yeah. According to Mark Stein, Heat eyeing Donovan Mitchell. I mean, again, there's still nothing about the thought process of Cleveland looking to do anything, which I think makes sense because they've honestly been playing relatively well as of late, so they're not really in a position where they have to panic and do anything. I think the concern would mainly come from is he going to stay, but also his contract isn't up after the season, so you don't necessarily have to do it now. But as we get closer to the trade deadline, I still am very curious to see what, occurs in terms of what a team like a Cleveland does, because it still doesn't quite feel like they're there in terms of like the upper tier of the Eastern Conference teams. It still feels like they're a tier below those. So, but at the same time, you know, I don't necessarily know how easy it is for them to be able to make some upgrades to the roster. So I am curious to see what they do. But like I said, at the very least, they've been playing pretty well as of late. Um, which is good because again they're very shorthanded. So you need to pile up wins as much as you can now until these guys come back, which they're still kind of a ways away. I think.
Yeah, sounds like a copium report where Miami still might be grieving the fact that they weren't able to get Dame. I'm just messing around, but I mean, I guess like if I was a GM, I'd be monitoring every star, But I just don't understand how this is like crazy news. But I do, because I feel like wouldn't Cleveland just be more on the reluctant end of side of the spectrum to like move Donovan Mitchell or even entertain that stuff as of
Right.
right
I
now?
mean,
Because I mean they're the 6th seed, they're not horrible. Miami's right
right.
behind them, but I guess if Miami's offering the farm, then it's like okay, you can't really turn that down. But I just don't think Miami's one of those teams that's probably going to do that. I don't even think
Yeah.
they have that. That was the
think
whole concern with Damian Lillard in the first place.
right. I think it would largely be dependent on what is offered, but at the same time, if you're Cleveland, there's no need to do it now.
Right.
It's more so if you already know that he's not going to stay, which a lot of people think he won't stay, then that's where you kind of think about it. But again, he's not. His contract isn't done after this season, so unless it's like we can't afford to lose out on this offer, like you kind of were suggesting right there. I don't feel like there's a lot of pressure to do it yet. But again, like you said, if something comes up where like the Heat offer multiple guys and it's like younger pieces that may fit more so the timeline of what the Cavs have right now, then you might as well then you have at the very least you entertain it. So
Sure. Agreed. Yeah.
um and then next up, Hornets won't trade LaMelo. So I didn't really think that they were going to do that as of right now. I mean, they just extended him, so I don't even know if they can necessarily do that right now. Or I mean, I guess, but at the same time, it didn't really make a lot of sense. I guess there's probably some level of frustration because he's been hurt a lot. Um, but at the same time, I mean, according to Woj, he said Charlotte considers him one of their building blocks, which kind of makes sense. I mean, like he's their best player. Not a perfect player by any means, but when he's out there, he's very productive. It's just he's not out there a whole lot. He gets hurt a lot, and that's obviously a concern. And that's part of what's making Charlotte a lot worse right now than they already are. And again, they're probably just not a very good team, anyways. But it doesn't help when you got multiple games out with your best players out, and then in addition to that, other guys have been out for long stretches as well, right? Like Mark Williams, their center, he's just had a bad back the whole season.
Yeah.
There's been stretches where Rozier is out, who's played really well this year, having one of his best seasons. Other guys like PJ Washington, Gordon Hayward, right? Like even Brandon Miller, right? Everybody on the team has missed significant stretches, and that hasn't helped. So it's kind of hard to like really look at what do you even have on that roster. But I think at the very least, you do look at LaMelo Ball as one of your building blocks. I mean, obviously, Charlotte, I think, at the end of the day, you did mess up, when you traded for Miles Bridges and you drafted Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. But, LaMelo Ball is not like a horrible consolation prize. You'd rather have
Yeah.
SGA, obviously, but, it's not like LaMelo Ball is a scrub. But, so it makes sense that he's a building block. It kind of surprised me because wouldn't I wouldn't expect him to be traded unless he like just asks out. I mean, now he's making a lot of money, so now it's kind of up to him to fulfill that contract. So can he stay healthy? Can he continue to get better? And can they win more games? And because again, they've been pretty bad, since the All Star, the year he was an All Star as an injury replacement or whatever, and it felt like he was on the rise, and the team was on a rise. But since then, they've not even been a factor at all. They've
Yeah.
basically been irrelevant. Now they have new ownership, so we'll see if that makes a change. But pretty rough season for Charlotte so far.
Yeah, and it's like I think, a lot of people don't really understand this, but new ownership is somewhat of a rebuild in itself. Because then, they probably will bring in their new employees and stuff and new GMs. But I think, them kind of putting their foot down and backing their guy, which is what they're supposed to do, I think, especially in a guy like LaMelo Ball, is good. I mean, I didn't think it was really necessary, but, for those, I guess, who were doubting or, they just probably wanted to make it public information that LaMelo is not on the trading block at all in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's nice. It's
Yeah,
just it doesn't really feel like it was necessary. I mean, did
exactly.
anybody expect Lamelo Ball to be traded anybody
No,
anytime?
I didn't.
So yeah. So um, moving on. Um, the in-season tournament is expected to be back next season. I mean, that's no surprise. It was a massive success.
Hmm.
Everybody liked it. I know in terms of viewership, it wasn't crazy, but just in general, it generated, I think, a lot of interest, media wise,
Yeah.
on the NBA at a time when it doesn't really get a whole lot of attention. So, I mean, again, like two thumbs up for the in-season tournament. We liked the idea of it. We supported it the whole way. We got to see it, through to the end of this season, and I mean, like, it's been great. So,
Yeah, and it's like you were saying, I know a lot of people, have a lot of friends who they don't normally watch the NBA this early, but they did when the in-season tournament was going on. So it clearly got the job done, and I think that was the point, was just to bring in more attention earlier in the year than to have to wait all the way until the finals for them to start making some money.
um, and then, according to ESPN, no link between load management and reduced injury. This was something that I think had also come out in the off season, right, when they were kind of talking and discussing, the idea of like, well now, guys aren't going to be able to just sit out games, because they need to play a certain amount of games to qualify for awards or whatever. Um, but I guess in a way, it kind of makes sense, right? Like basically, they don't really see, any correlation between like, oh, if you sit out, then that means you're going to be able to stay healthy, and avoid injury. Because I mean, like you could make, the case that if you sit out, right, then you could be kind of rusty, physically, and then
Sure.
when you step out onto the court after you've sat for a while, I know they're not just like sitting for like days and days and days, because they're working out and doing and practicing, but they're not playing.
Yeah,
Because
it's not NBA minutes.
yeah, there's no substitute for NBA minutes. So I mean, in a way, it makes sense. And it's just a matter of the workload over the course of the entire season probably is pretty high, right? Teams play fast. It's a lot of games, and we again like the obvious change I think for most people would be to lower the amount of regular season games, but they're not going to do that. But at the very least, I mean, like, can we get rid of some of the back to backs? I mean, I don't feel. I mean, I know the reason why is because it's 82 games. If it wasn't 82 games, you wouldn't have to have any back to backs,
Yeah.
because if there were no back to backs, I mean, the season would probably be done in like May or June or something like that instead of April, in terms of the regular season. But either way, it makes sense because again, like I mean, obviously this came up, with Kawhi, right? The year that the Raptors won the title, where they load managed him, and he still, had to play through injury. So it never felt like it was like a real thing. And again, there's also no indication that it's led to real success, right? Because the teams that won titles, right, really didn't take the regular season off. I mean, you look at the last five champions, right? I know Denver kind of took the season off, but their guys still played for the most part.
Right.
Right, it was like load managing in games as opposed to just sitting out games left and right. Same with Golden State, right? They played, most of their guys the whole way through. They just had injuries. Milwaukee, same thing. Lakers, same thing. So it never felt like it was a legitimate argument. It just seemed like people were just kind of saying something just to kind of make a case for something that didn't really need a case made for it.
Yeah, and I think the issue with load management more so was like, okay, I'm paying this money to go see somebody, but now they're sitting out, so I don't get to see them. I think that was more of the issue that I had with load management. So I never really understood the correlation of like load management equals like health stuff. Like I do, but I don't at the same time. So it is weird. Never been a fan of it. Like I said, I had my own reasons for it. Because it was kind of just annoying when it's like, great, this guy who I paid all this money to see is not going to be playing. Cool, whatever. But I mean, hey, it's a report, so can't be too mad at it.
Yeah, again, it's just I feel like they put this out I think early before the season started just to
Yeah,
kind of let everybody know like now that that's kind of out that doesn't really help. We don't need to do that.
yeah,
Um, so now moving on, um, again we already talked about it before. According to Woes, the Hawks are open to almost anything, right? Obviously we've heard a lot about the idea of the Hawks being sellers at the trade deadline, right? Where they're going to trade DeJounte Murray. They're going to trade Bogdan Bogdanovich. Clint Capella, maybe DeAndre Hunter. It makes sense. Just from the perspective of again, they haven't been very good.
yeah,
The DeJounte Murray piece just hasn't worked out, right? I don't think he's, you know, been the piece as advertised in terms of what they thought. In terms of he's not a bad player, but he's not as big of a difference maker as I think they would have hoped for.
yeah,
And the rest of the roster also just hasn't followed suit. And it's time to make some changes, right? So you're not getting rid of Trey Young, at least for this season. Maybe in the future, but not right now. And obviously, there's no point in getting rid of Jalen Johnson because you drafted him and he's played very well. Um, so, anyone else on the roster, it makes sense in terms of being up for, game, right? They've mentioned in terms of Jake Fisher, he talked about, 5 teams interested in DeJounte Murray. You mentioned the Lakers, the Knicks. I believe he also put Detroit in there, um,
oh
which was
God.
yeah, which was kind of interesting. I think another guy mentioned also the Warriors, and I think Shams the other day, he also mentioned potentially the Spurs, funny enough.
Hmm.
Um,
That would be a weird reunion.
yeah, yeah. So Philly, I don't know which one would be the most likely for him, but just in general, um, you know, which Hawk, I guess, we kind of talked about it before in terms of most likely to be traded. Do you think it's DeJounte Murray or Bogdanovich? Because I think you can make the case for either one, but I feel like Murray's probably seen as the better player.
Yeah,
So, again, I think the thought process is for the Hawks, if we're going to give him up, maybe it's a 2-for-1 where, yeah, you're going to have to give us an additional piece. That's where, like, the Lakers argument comes from, where I think Jake Fisher mentioned, yeah, if you're the Hawks, right, like, they want Austin Reeves as well. But if you give up Austin Reeves and an additional player, then we'll give you 2 potentially, as opposed to like, you would, the contracts don't match up anyways, but like, you wouldn't want to necessarily, just do that if you're the Lakers, right? Trade one guy for DeJounte Murray and it's just Austin Reeves. But if you're Atlanta, you're not just going to take D'Angelo Russell for Austin. And then,
yeah,
same with any of these other teams and packages. It depends on what you're giving up. But I think for the Hawks, it makes sense that it's seller season for
yeah.
them because
It
they've
should
been
be.
a bottom seller team. So,
Yeah, I'm just glad they're biting the bullet and taking the L. A lot of teams don't have the stomach to do that. We've seen people hold on to people for way too long. That they had previously acquired. So hey, I like it because I kind of like hearing the theories and rumors on where DeJounte Murray is going to go because I think he can fit in a lot of good systems for sure. Philly has piqued my interest. I don't think that's probably going to be where he goes, but it would be very intriguing. The Lakers is another one. So, I'm just curious what the return value is going to be. That's what I'm really, really hyped about as well. Because, DeJounte Murray's not making an obscene amount of money, but the productivity hasn't been amazing, but I think he's a player that can fit great into a system. You just have to hold him accountable to that, like we saw in his San Antonio years, where he was kind of like that do-it-all two-way guy. But in Atlanta, he's more of like scorer. That's kind of really it, you know?
Yeah. Um, yeah, it'll be fascinating to see, and I think other teams will join the party,
Hmm.
as well. I think that the trade deadline will be busier than I think what was initially kind of suspected. Not
Hmm.
that every team does something drastic, but I think, we'll see a little more. I think it's just a prediction
I
of
think it'll
mine
be
that I
better
think.
than last year.
I mean, last year the difference was that it wasn't just the last day. It was like 2 or 3 days, right? Because we
Yeah.
had that day, where Kyrie Irving was
Kyrie.
moved
Yeah.
and like Kevin Durant was moved
Yeah.
later. Like that's a pretty significant, bunch of guys in the trade deadline.
Sure.
But then on the act, and then you had the Westbrook trade. But then like the day of, there weren't as many major significant moves because there was a lot of stuff that was rumored that just ended up not happening. But now
Right.
we've already had like the Anunoby trade, right? And now we have all these other rumors going on. So I think it'll be busier than I think we would have expected.
Yeah.
Um, I guess we've already also had some big trades that were in the offseason as well, right? Because you had Lillard, you had Holiday, Porzingis. So
Harden.
yeah, Harden, which was at the early part of the regular season.
Yep.
So we'll see. But like I said, that's just my prediction. I think it'll be a little bit busier than what people expect. But I
Hmm.
don't know. I don't think it'll all. I think it'll be similar to last year, where I think it'll span more than one day.
All right.
And then the final thing. So the second return of All Star votes has come in. Um, not too much has changed. The big difference is that Trey Young jumped over Damian Lillard, right? Lillard was second, and now it's Trey Young. Remember the fan votes 50%, then media's 25, then players are the remaining 25. So we'll see, how that edges and evens out. Then a couple of guys, right, dropped out. Like Booker came into the top 10, and Austin Reeves came out. Um, and then I think Julius Randle, right, he popped up in there and he knocked Kuzma off the list. So I mean, we're starting to see a little bit more, I guess, quote unquote, normalcy in terms of like the All Star list. I mean, I still think it'll probably end up being the same starters for the most part. And again, I think a couple of them may be a little bit different than what like you think it should be. Because again, we'll do one where we have our all stars, and I think it'll be a little bit different than what it actually ends up being. I mean, we'll put it out before that happens, because I think we still have a couple weeks before um the lineup is announced. Because I think next week, right, will be the third returns, and then we'll see. So that will be the fan returns, and then after that, then they'll announce the starters. I think on TNT the early part of the week after
Yeah.
that, and then they'll have the reserves a little bit later. So,
Yeah.
um, but in terms of like the main takeaway, it's just like a couple of guys that probably should have been higher on the list are now higher on the list. So now there's not really quite as much to complain about, even though I don't really think we complained a ton before. We just felt that there were some other guys that should be higher. Like we thought Brunson should be higher. He's not. But but like there wasn't really a whole lot to complain about.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, not much has changed to the point where, it's like breaking news or anything, but it's always nice to see where the fans' heads are at. And I think, everybody's relatively in the same area as last time. There are some people who I still don't think should be there, like a guy like Klay Thompson, I don't think should really be there. That's not any hate towards him. I just think there's probably somebody better in the West that should take his spot. And like you said, Reeves dropped out. So, we're coming back down to earth already in somewhat, in the second return. So, very curious to see what the final one is going to look like for the fans.
Yeah, and
Can't
now
wait to
the
do ours,
voting.
actually.
Right, and now the voting is different. Because I know in the past, I can't remember when they changed it. I think they changed it last year, right? Where in the past you could kind of just use Twitter and like tweet out what you wanted, who you wanted in the All Star thing,
Yeah.
and then they found out what was it like that there were bots that were
Yep.
out there that were like inflating some players' vote totals. Like I think who was it? It was Wiggins, I think, right? Where
Yeah.
he was the guy that where like he had some inflated totals. Um, and again, he was actually an all-star this season, but now he's nowhere near on this list.
No, no. Shouldn't be.
This season.
Keep him as far away from as this thing from possible. So,
Right. But yeah, but now you have to have, so just if you haven't voted, right, you go on NBA.com, right? You
yep.
fill out the All-Star thing, and then you have to either sign into if you already have one or create an NBA account, ID account or whatever. It's very simple. Email, password. So, if you haven't done so, do that.
Yeah.
And then
It's
like I said,
fun.
relatively soon we'll have an episode where we will show and talk about, our all-star picks
Yes,
because it
sir,
is coming
ski.
up next month, which is always a fun time. It is in Indianapolis, so fun times in
Yeah.
Indianapolis, I guess.
Oh joy.
But yeah, so regardless, we'll talk about that as we get, closer to that point.
Yeah.
So now that's pretty much it for today's episode of All Fall Takes. Again, lots of things happening around the NBA. As we get closer to the trade deadline, things are gonna heat up. Things are gonna get, really insane. There's gonna be lots of rumors, lots of discussions. So make sure to keep up with us and keep watching. And stay informed so that way what's going on in the NBA. Again, we got, don't forget to follow us on our socials, right? We have a Discord in the making,
Yeah.
plan, in the future, relatively soon, but not right now. But we'll keep you posted as that continues to be worked out. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. As we mentioned before, right? If you comment, on one of our social posts or whatever, we will read that comment at the beginning of the episode. To show our support, for the people who show support to us.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, already mentioned, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you next week.